Well, welcome to another edition of Talking Propeller Heads, where we discuss areas of change that affect B2B marketing. We've already covered the opening up of social. I think we were ahead of the game there with the exodus from X after the US election. The opening up of social media was a very timely discussion we had. We've also discussed the uses and abuses of AI. Today, we're questioning the value for B2B marketing companies of pitching to the mainstream media. So we're here with mainstream media pundit Leon Emirali from Al Jazeera to the BBC. I think you've always got it covered. And here's the dilemma. As a B2B marketing communications company, we often hear from our clients, wistfully they sigh, oh, if only they could go through their wish list, if only we could be in the Wall Street Journal, in the Financial Times, in The Verge, in VentureBeat, in the Fast Company, in Barron's, it goes on. And we always wonder, on the vanity over value stakes, is it worth it? I mean, let's face it, the mainstream media at the moment is having a hard time. We've had fake news and now we've got fact checking, and I still wonder who checks the fact checkers. We've got always the growing partisan coverage because so many areas are now politicized. You can't discuss education, health, energy in the mainstream media without it having a political angle. And recent research shows that as a news source, the mainstream media has the lowest trust it has ever had and a fast dropping readership. So here's my question. What's happening to mainstream media, Leon? Are we seeing the gradual death of mainstream media, or are the reports of its death vastly exaggerated? Over to you, Leon.
Thank you, Judith. Well, I think it's a really interesting question. And in reality, we can all agree that I think there is less satisfaction with mainstream media. We are beginning to see the media landscape proliferate, and we are seeing people take their news, take their information from sources that aren't necessarily the household names of media, BBC here in the UK, CNN in the US. We are instead seeing a lot of people take their news from a variety of different sources, not least social media. And in what that's done to mainstream media has made it harder for them to effectively work with their audience to understand what it is the audience wants to hear, give them that news in an entertaining, informative way. And that's left a lot of mainstream media scrambling for a new business model, a new content model that some of them are doing very well and some of them aren't. And I think that we're also seeing a great deal of partisan media creep into the mainstream media mix. We saw that during the US elections. You know, Fox News, for example, clearly have an agenda, or they did during the US election. We're seeing it in the UK market with GB News. We're seeing it in Europe as well, with channels in Germany and in France also having an editorial agenda. So clearly they are creating a level of an echo chamber. And I think that is something that people want to avoid from mainstream media. They want to avoid an echo chamber, because ultimately what they want instead is to have something that is reliable, something they can trust. And we've certainly seen an evolution of mainstream media where it is no longer about the quantity of people that they can reach. Actually, we're seeing numbers dwindle in terms of the consumption of mainstream media, but there still is value in placing your business or having a feature in a mainstream media title like the FT, like Bloomberg, Wall Street Journal. Those organizations, those outlets might not have the biggest reach necessarily, but they still have a great deal of prestige attached to it. So even though you might place yourself in the FT and only perhaps a readership of about 100,000, actually what you can do then is to promote that piece on your own channels through LinkedIn, through Twitter, put some money behind it even, and reach a much greater audience.
But for real value, you have to go to your target audience, don't you? And we've seen the change now with Donald Trump and Kamala Harris in the States actually almost spurning mainstream media and going to their own forms of outlets that are going to be helpful to them and will actually get to the audience that they're looking for. Can you talk a little bit more about this?
Yeah, I think it's a real challenge for mainstream media to compete with online media such as podcasts in the ability for businesses, politicians, brands to reach their target audience. And it's a much more efficient way if you are trying to reach young men, as Donald Trump was during the presidential election, to go on the Joe Rogan podcast, or if you're trying to reach young women, as Kamala Harris did, go on the Call Her Daddy podcast. Much more efficient way of deploying a media strategy as opposed to going to the mainstream media, which is much more of a scattergun approach. It reaches a much broader array of individuals that aren't necessarily in your target market. So I think that's a real challenge for mainstream media to be able to keep up with that. And there's a huge amount of value for brands to consider that strategy that we saw characterizing the US election. And there's also a different opportunity for B2B businesses, because we are now seeing Generation Z entering the B2B buying funnel. And what that means is that Gen Z typically aren't engaging with mainstream media as much as perhaps the generations that went before them. So they are the ones listening to podcasts. They are the ones that are getting their news from TikTok. And, there is a blurring of the lines between what is considered B2C media and B2B media, because everyone's consuming the same thing ultimately. Even if you're a B2B buyer, you're still going to be listening to a podcast. So there's an opportunity now for brands to be infiltrating that non-mainstream media space to find those B2B buyers and concentrating on where those buyers are. And if that means a B2B company opening up a TikTok account or trying to speak to podcasts, then I think that's an exciting new frontier for them to be exploiting.
Because we've always said a picture's worth 1,000 words in mainstream media, but now we have multimedia on easily accessible platforms. Are there any immediate, quick and easy things we can do to engage our target audience? Apart from, as I often say, dancing on TikTok, which might be engaging but wouldn't do much for our clients' brand equity, what things can we encourage our clients to do to actually take advantage of these platforms?
Well, there's rightly been a huge focus on things like your video and photographs. That's long been a staple of media, mainstream media. What we're seeing now is actually the introduction of audio becoming a key function. That there are a number of mainstream media platforms, the likes of the FT and Bloomberg, who actually you can listen to their articles rather than read them, which is a very useful function. And I think for brands and for businesses, there's a huge opportunity there, because unlike video, which is generally quite expensive, quite complicated, audio is incredibly simple, incredibly cheap to produce, and therefore there's a much lower barrier of entry. And if you get the right guests, if you get the right type of content, you could find yourself with a hit podcast potentially on your hands. And I think that is something that people can look at. So I'd keep an eye on audio. I think it is a growing medium, and I think that we are going to see that continue to proliferate in mainstream media and on social media and in the digital sphere as well.
So what you're saying is really the mainstream media isn't going to go away. It's just becoming a much broader church, and they're having to learn to live with an audience that has opinions, choice, and power. And so that's something that they have to get used to. Interesting, the use of podcasts. We've recently at the big AWS event in Las Vegas, I had Mike Vizard of Textron TV. He was there from very much a technical point of view, interviewing about detailed technology developments, doing live video interviews. And we get the point about audio, because our Talking Propeller Heads are now, you'll be pleased to know, going out on audio as well. Liam, refreshing to get your views on mainstream media. It's always good to talk. And I think, as you're saying, it's not an end in itself, but if used properly, it's a very good means to a B2B brand awareness end. And thanks for listening in, everybody. And we'll speak to you again at the next Talking Propeller Heads. Bye.